The new book that's coming out, it's actually called Neurodiversity Affirming Schools, Transforming Practices so all students feel accepted and supported. But the concept, it goes throughout, right? It's that neurodiversity affirming component of things. It's just accepting the fact that there are people who need to look at the barriers, right? And that's what it is. It's like doing a barrier analysis of your life, what's getting in the way, as opposed to how am I not fitting into the environment? It's the like, how is the environment not fitting me?
Yes. Welcome to Princess in the Pea Podcast, where we deep dive into the world of neurodiversity, accessibility, and advocacy. I'm your host, Annie Crowe, a lawyer turned advocacy coach and the founder of NeuroAccess, dedicated to empowering neurodivergent people. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we record this podcast, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today. The podcast is called Princess in the Pea, which holds a special meaning. It comes from my childhood nickname, which I earned for being a highly sensitive, unidentified autistic ADHD kid, much like the princess in Hans Christian Andersen's famous fairy tale. In the story, the princess's sensitivity to a tiny pea hidden beneath many layers of mattresses is what reveals her true identity. Similarly, as neurodivergent individuals, our unique sensitivities and perceptions often reveal our authentic selves and unique ways of experiencing the world. This podcast is dedicated to celebrating these differences, shedding light on the challenges, and sharing strategies to help us thrive. Join me as we explore the latest insights, thought leadership, and stories that will help you understand and navigate the complexities of being autistic, ADHD, twice exceptional, or any other neurotype in a neurotypical world. Whether you're neurodivergent yourself or an ally supporting neurodivergent people, this podcast is your go-to resource for fostering equity, inclusion, and belonging. Let's get started. Our guest today, which some of you may remember from season 1, is the phenomenal Amanda Morin. Amanda is a neurodivergent neurodiversity activist, an award-winning author of 5, yes, that's right, 5, soon to be 6 books. Amazing. Early childhood specialist and internationally known speaker. And I say internationally because, I'm over here in Australia being your number 1 fan. So I know you're big in the US, but, we're stealing you. Deeply committed to fostering accessible and inclusive environments for neurodivergent individuals, she leverages her expertise in learning and child development, universal design for learning, or UDL, special education, advocacy, and mental health to distill complex data into easily digestible information for parents, educators, and employers who want to advance the mission of creating inclusive content, programs, and strategies to make the world accessible to all. Welcome, Amanda. Thank you for being here.
It's Again. A joy, and I like the international. That's a nice addition. That's great.
You should definitely keep that. You have a growing fan base in Australia, and I'm sure more globally as well. Anyway, I'm so excited to talk to you today. I think people already probably know that you're one of my favorite guests, which I keep bringing back because I can't get enough. And now you have another book coming out, which is so exciting, and I've already pre-ordered it. I'm very excited with Emily Kershaw-Morris from the Neurodiversity Podcast, which is one of my absolute favorite podcasts. I need to get Emily to come on here at some point too.
Oh, I think so. I think you would be. I don't know though. She might replace me as your favorite.
Oh,
so
no,
I'm not
you guys
sure.
I'm sure you'll be equal. If not, I don't see anyone replacing you ever. I just can't see that happening.
I mean, it was such a good pairing. I mean, just so nice.
Totally.
To work together. Yeah.
Absolutely. I thought today we could dive into a couple of hot topics, including the absurdity of having to prove your neurodivergence, which is a big thing today, which surprises me. Even
it is.
Yeah, there was a big conference just this week in Australia for ADHD professionals, and even there they had psychiatrists claiming overdiagnosis of ADHD. And one of the most well-known psychiatrists in Australia last week was also claiming overdiagnosis of ADHD and autism. And yet here we are fighting for our rights to be recognized and to actually, have the mechanisms to advocate for our needs and live more accessible lives, whether that's in education, workplace, or whatever. So I thought we could kick it off with discussing how ridiculous that is.
I mean, it is ridiculous, right? And it's ridiculous for so many reasons for me, like, let alone the overdiagnosis component of it. I mean, we know both of us are neurodivergent, right? And we know
Yeah.
that you don't have to have a formal diagnosis to recognize your neurodivergence. So
No
even
way.
that alone, right? So that in itself sort of makes me think, okay, whether or not we're talking about overdiagnosis or underdiagnosis and there are all those things, like, the way you interact with the world is the way you interact with the world. And one of the things I love about neurodivergence as an identity is you get to claim it. You claim it
Totally.
as your identity. I don't know what it's like to be another Amanda. I've
No.
always been this Amanda, right?
Regardless of what diagnoses we've had.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And they change, right? They change over time for a lot of people.
100%.
And I just always find it so, I don't know, like disconcerting or disappointing or something like that, that I have to be able to say, like, no, let me tell you exactly why I need this or
Yeah.
what I need. Or, we don't ask people to prove that they need glasses,
Or
right?
any real physical health condition, right?
Exactly.
We're not saying, oh, you need
exactly.
a re-diagnosis of your MS or hypermobility. Like, it's one
Right.
and done.
Right.
Whereas ADHD is like, I had to get re-diagnosed last year with ADHD after 5 years because my psychiatrist took a break. And anytime you have to get another doctor, which happens because doctors have lives,
Yep.
you need a complete re-diagnosis. No other medical condition requires that.
Yeah, my son has a special insurance here in the United States. He's an ADHDer, so he has ADHD and autism, right?
Woo-woo.
So, and every year we have to, and I can't even say the word proof. Like, every year we have to prove that it's still not. And I just kind of have this moment where I'm like, still autistic, still ADHDer.
I'm pretty
Like,
sure the literature backs up the fact that you don't grow out of it too. So why
I
is this
know.
happening? Like, policy to
It's
practice
so
is not
silly.
translating.
Although I will say some of the people, like the nurses who do the certification, are just so wonderful. They're like,
Oh, that's
"Yep,
great.
this makes sense. This, of course, right?
Yeah.
We're just gonna look at him and smile and have a conversation, and that's that."
Yeah.
And that's like, but still, it's an absurdity, right? It takes up so much time, and it sows doubt. And that's the thing that bothers me so much,
Exactly.
is it sows doubt, and it
And
sows doubt like
it
inside
feels
you.
really invalidating of your
Yeah.
lived experience as well. Like, I don't know about you, even with the amazing nurses, but a lot of my clients will have to go through reassessment for our national insurance scheme, and it causes so much stress and anxiety. And, knowing that you're probably going to have a good experience because now you've seen these nurses are great, you just never know if you're going to get the same ones, right? Or you never know
Right.
if you go in on the day that they have a nurse that maybe, or a doctor or whoever, that isn't very well educated in this space or has a lot of ableism and ignorance, and you're going to have to bear the brunt of that, or your son.
Right.
And
Well,
that's
and I
what
think
worries me. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, I will have parents who say to me, I don't know whether or not my kiddo should take their medication before these appointments. And I'm thinking, holy moly. And I've thought it too, right? Like, do you
Totally.
go in unmedicated to prove? And no, no, you don't. You don't.
No.
You should never have to do that, right?
Yeah.
It's so, I don't know. I think there's something very strange about having to prove the way your brain works. I mean,
Totally.
I don't know how you do that. I think what it makes us do is focus on the things we don't do well instead of saying, like, here's what I know about myself. It makes us focus on saying, here's what I can't do. Here's what I struggle with. Here's what, and there's nothing like having to go through that conversation over and over again to make yourself realize, like, I don't feel so good about myself right now when I have those conversations. When I
Yeah.
have the conversations and I, like, look at the ways I could see the world. Or when you talk about the princess and the pea and I start laughing because I say that to my husband all the time, I'm like, the pillow's funny, the blanket's weird, like all of these
Yeah.
kinds of things that are just part of who I am, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, and we can laugh about it, but I don't want it to have to be like a tragedy that, my socks feel funny in my shoes. Like it's not that big a deal.
Yeah.
I know it's true and I know how to handle it, but to have to walk into a room and to prove to people that this is really dire. It's
Yeah.
not dire. It just is, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like we've had to deal with it forever. But can you imagine
Yeah.
like a diabetic going in and being like, I should not take my insulin so that I can prove that I'm still diabetic? Like,
Right. Oh,
that
I
would
mean,
never happen.
and we laugh at that.
We do.
And we laugh at
We're
that.
laughing because it's absurd.
It's absurd, right? And so we go back to the absurdity of it. I don't know.
Yes.
And I think it's really hard when the people who you feel like are supposed to be on your side, right? The diagnosticians, and if they're saying things that invalidate our existence, then it makes it really hard to figure out who's an ally. And,
Yes.
and that's important. It's really
Totally.
important to know who you can count on and that you can count on them consistently.
Totally. And also, I think, I mean, obviously there's a power dynamic between doctors and patients and such, but I was watching a forensic psychiatrist on YouTube recently, and he was making commentary about overdiagnosis. And one of the comments he said was, I'm laughing because it's so ridiculous, was, you know, I'm not going to come and tell you how to push trolleys in your job. Don't tell me how to do my job. I'm so many problems with that statement, but like he was implying like, I'm a psychiatrist, I know what I'm doing, you're not, you can't comment. And the thing for me with that, other than the fact that it's like insensitive, offensive in so many ways, but you know, so many of us have completely lost faith in mental health professionals because one, they've caused so much harm, and two, they've just done so much invalidating and gaslighting of us that how can we trust someone like that, you know?
And that's a profession where what that person is saying is, don't tell me how to talk about you, right? Because it's not like they're pushing carts, or it's not like they're at the cash register, or not like they're in front of a class, or whatever it is but what they're doing is talking to you about your experience in life and how you experience life.
Yeah.
And what they're saying is, I'm going to tell you what your experience is.
Exactly.
And I don't even know what to do with that. Like, I don't have a box in my mind to
no,
put
neither.
that into.
And that's the thing, right? Is that even though they've got the expertise from an education background, no one will be as expert in you as you, ever. Like, only you will ever truly know the inner workings of yourself. Yes, we can talk about them externally, we can externalize, we can share, but, you know, to me, it just doesn't make sense to not be empowering the individual patient in their own journey and their own story, and instead just using very limited research that's been heavily debunked with its biases, to just say, no, you couldn't possibly know yourself better than me.
And there's the added piece of this too, right? When we're talking about having to prove neurodivergence, there's the added piece where I don't want to have to walk into a room and say, why would I choose this? And I feel like it puts us in a position of asking that question, where really the question is, do you know who I am? Right? The question isn't, why would I choose this? Because that puts me in sort of a victim position, right?
Totally.
And I don't feel like a victim. I don't feel like I'm suffering. I mean, there are days when I don't feel like I'm thriving, let me tell you.
Same.
But my life is not a tragedy. And so having to prove something feels really negative, as opposed to just being matter of fact and saying, like, today I am not wearing socks. I am not able to answer your questions because I can't answer a question. Or even like, I can't get out of bed today because the idea is just too overwhelming for me.
Totally.
Because I don't know, like, it's been very, very hot here, which is really different. I live in Maine in the United States, which is not known for being hot, right?
Oh,
It's been hot and humid, and it's been really hard on my sensory system.
Yeah.
And there are days where it's just been very difficult for me to get moving. I don't want to have to explain over and over again that that's a truth. It just is.
Totally.
It is a thing. And that's okay.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, like, I mean, one of our first episodes was titled Strengths-Based Approach. And I think that this very much stems from the fact that we're it is so harmful to have to constantly dive into the deficit pathology
Yeah.
paradigm, improving everything and having to, really show how bad you are, quote unquote,
Yeah.
to get any kind of support or validation or access to anything, any accommodations. It's interesting because there was something that happened, and I'd be interested to see if, like, you've experienced this, or at least it relates to a lot of the work you do and who you help. But when I was diagnosed 5 years ago, I went through this very, I think, standard process that a lot of ADHDers go through, right? Which is deep diving into learning everything you can about autism and ADHD. Reading the research papers, every book, every YouTube video,
Right.
just consuming every bit of information, which, caveat, can be dangerous because not all information is created equal. And at that point, you're not really sure how to differentiate the good from the less
Right.
good. But I kind of had this belief that if I could learn everything about these conditions, then it would help me in my life, right? I could explain to people, well, I'm having this sensory overload because of ABC, and this is the academic, meaning and reasons behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found was, in practice very quickly, was that it actually didn't help. No amount of explaining the neuroscience and the medicalized meaning behind things would actually help in terms of people really meeting my needs. Like, yes, maybe it would give them a little bit more empathy, or maybe it would make it harder for them to question the validity of my experience because I was backing it up with some, hardcore evidence. But it never really did this, like, tangible thing, which is what I've always wanted. And, what I preach now around self-advocacy is, like, how do we get from A to B of going from having unmet access needs to having met access needs? Because you and I know that the biggest challenges to having neurodivergence is really the lack of access. It's not the condition in itself, although it often feels like it is. It's really, and I can say this as someone, I'm not just trying to be positive and preach. Like, I've literally created a life for myself in the last 5 years,
Right.
where I've met my access needs. I work for myself. I've taught everyone in my inner circle of family and close friends what I need. And it is absolutely life-changing and really further pushes the point home to me that there's absolutely nothing wrong with autism and ADHD. It's the complete lack of acknowledgement and support from our environment. So I know that was long-winded.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's exactly right. And it's interesting. You said, the new book that's coming out, it's actually called Neurodiversity Affirming Schools, Transforming Practices so all students feel accepted and supported. But the concept, it goes throughout, right? It's that neurodiversity affirming component of things. It's just accepting the fact that there are people who need to look at the barriers, right? And that's what it is. It's like doing a barrier analysis of your life, what's getting in the way, as opposed to how am I not fitting into the environment? It's the, like, how is the environment not fitting me?
Yes.
You just explained, I mean, I think so many of us go down that rabbit hole and we read all the things and we use all. But what we don't have is we don't have the people on the other side who've also gone down that rabbit hole, right? And that's the piece that's missing, is if they haven't read all the same things for the same reasons, it's exhausting. It's an exhausting thing to go through explaining. And I think it's absolutely right to do with the people who are in your, I like how you say the inner circle, right?
Yeah.
Because those are the people who it really matters,
Yes. Yeah.
it really meant, like, I will tell you, writing with Emily has been such an experience. We're both neurodivergent and in different ways. And, and in the ways where, she'll put on a call, we'll get on a call together and she'll be like, I'm eating lunch. I'm going to have to put myself on mute because I know the crunching is going to bother you. She already knows that, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Or, she's wonderful in that, she gets distracted and she, and I'll be like, your narrating is making this really tough for me, right? But we can do that because we know each other well enough at this point.
Yeah.
But it's really hard when you have all of these other people in the world. You're like, I want you to understand this, not because I want you to feel bad for me,
No.
not because, you know, not even because I want you to be more educated, it's more because I want you to change how you see the world. And if
Yes.
everybody could just be inside our heads and understand what it is we're seeing, the world would be great.
Oh my
But
gosh,
until
yes.
then, we have to figure out how do we give them that lens, right?
Totally.
And we live in a world where the default is neuronormative. It's not neurodivergent. And I think that's a big piece of like the work that I do is how, and I don't even use the word neurotypical anymore. I use
Mm.
neuronormative very
Yes.
specifically because typical is, I mean, what's typical?
What's
I don't know what
typical,
typical
right?
is.
Yeah. Yeah.
But normative at least says we have these norms or standards that people put into place.
Mhm.
Goodness knows why. We don't always know
Yes.
why. Like they're random. I think they're random. I don't know. Maybe that's just I think
Yeah.
they're random.
But it's more of that
And
socio-political lens,
yeah,
right? Of
right.
understanding power and privilege and marginalization and oppression, which is so critical. And I think that's where a lot of, the more traditionally educated, medicalized side of it gets a bit lost because they just think that we're wanting to claim these cool identities, but they're completely missing the very real underlying factors of why that's even important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's something really important about knowing who you are and how your brain interacts with the world has shaped who you've become. Because if you don't like who you've become and you understand that, you can make changes, right?
Yeah.
But if you love who you are and other people think you're a little weird or quirky, cool. That's
Yeah.
fine with me.
Yeah.
I mean, I know there are a lot of people who think I'm weird and quirky, and I'm like, that's okay.
Woo woo.
And I'm all in,
Yeah.
right?
So something that I've been looking into a lot recently is, trying to sort of look at all the different ways of viewing these things. So you've got like the more positive psychology, strength-based approach, and then you've got obviously the pathology paradigm and the more traditional medicalized model and everything in between. And for
Right.
me, as a, purely focused on the advocacy element here, I feel like the best thing we can do is really look at all of our traits and characteristics and behaviors and remove the moral value. Stop judging what is good and what is bad, because a lot of those
Hmm.
judgments are from external influence anyway, often, depending on
Yeah.
how supportive your environment is. I grew up in a very military family, which has its own handful of problems, including how it values things like discipline and consistency and all the things that I absolutely couldn't access and felt so much shame over being an
Right.
ADHDer, not really understanding that. And so I think I've been preaching this for years because when I started doing the advocacy work, I was very much in the eating disorder space. So when I started Eating Disorders Neurodiversity Australia, and I remember speaking at the big international conference, and it was such an interesting experience for me because it was all psychologists and occupational therapists and social workers and psychiatrists, and it's very, very medicalized, right? And I'd spent like 3 days listening to speeches on how bad perfectionism is and how we need to basically like strip it out of people and to heal from eating disorders. And I got up there and the first thing I said was, why do you keep demonizing perfectionism? Like,
Right. Right.
perfectionism is one of my biggest character strengths. Yes, it causes me a lot of turmoil and challenge as well. But like, why have we got to assign good and bad to these things? Why can't we have this neutrality that allows us to bring curiosity to the table and have autonomy over what we choose to endorse in ourselves versus get support with, Like,
And I think that you really hit it there with the idea of it being moral, right? It's a moral judgment. And I think more of us need to actually say that out loud more often, right? And I think to be able to say that over and over and over again, to say there are not buckets of good and bad. There are buckets of expected, not expected, different from what I expected.
valued by
This is who I
society, less
am,
valued.
right? Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly, right? Like this is sort of the standard versus this is not the standard. And even that is sort of a moral judgment in itself, right? Because
totally.
a lot of the things that we as neurodivergent individuals, as parents of neurodivergent kids, as educators, whatever it is, however we have this sort of connection to neurodivergence, a lot of the things that we bump up against are the fact that some of our neurodivergent traits make other people uncomfortable. And it is not my job as a human to make you more comfortable. And I know that's not going to be a popular thing to say. I know that.
No.
Like people are like, but it's not. It's not, right? So like
Yeah.
one of my son's stims, I stim too. I sort of, I don't actually like think about it, but I spin, I sort of, do I can't you can't even see it, but I'm like sort of mixing my fingers together, right?
Yeah. Same.
Right.
Doing
We
it under
do
the table.
we do that thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I find
I don't even do it
silent
under the
stimming for
table. In fact,
podcasts.
like I actually I will tell people outright, I have a fidget with me and I'm just going to
totally.
use the fidget.
Always.
Right. Of course. But like so many times I've had to say to people about my son, like his stimming, it does something to his body that he needs it to do. I'm not sorry that it makes you uncomfortable, but I'm not going to ask him to change his behavior that is helping him, not harming anybody, so that you can feel more comfortable. And so I think that part of what we're seeing when we think about this is it's bad because it makes someone feel a thing, right?
Totally.
And whatever that thing is, it doesn't make it bad. It makes them have to grapple with something within themselves. And, one of the things that you talked about is that power of like having to educate people. And also, there's so much work that comes with that, right? And there's so much work that comes with educating people. And if the outcome is they know more, but they don't change their behavior, then there are times where I'm just like, nope, I'm going to tell you who I am. And I'm going to let you sit with how that makes you feel.
Mm-hmm.
It's not my responsibility to grapple with your feelings for you. It doesn't mean I'm not empathetic. I'm probably one of the most empathetic people,
I was
right?
going to say, I believe that.
I'm a fairly empathetic person, like to the point where I don't know, I cry when other people cry, like all of those kinds of things. Right?
I can't watch violent things because it makes me feel them.
Yeah. But I've gotten much better at realizing what's mine to own and what's not mine to own.
Yeah, which is so important from a boundary setting, self-protection. And I think it's like it can be that empathy, that high empathy, again, not a good or bad thing, sometimes really beautiful and helpful, other times really difficult to deal with when, you're so empathetic to their discomfort that often before we become, very aware of these things, we will fawn and mask and try to meet their needs and push our own aside because we're feeling that so deeply. And it takes, I think, a lot of conscious effort to undo that, to get to the point where you and I are now, where we're more comfortable letting people sit in the discomfort, knowing that that's not our problem and they need to.
Yeah. And it takes a lot of self-awareness as well to learn that that's not your discomfort, right? When you're such an empathetic person that you feel what's happening around you, it takes a lot of work to realize what are your feelings versus somebody else's feelings. And anyone out there who's listening to this who is an empathetic person, they're probably like, oh yeah, I know exactly what that means. Like there are days where I've been like, oh, I don't think that's me. I don't think I'm feeling that. That's somebody else's. And that's an unusual trait, but not one I would trade for anything.
Oh, neither. Yeah, I think it's beautiful as well. Okay, so this is a perfect segue into the double empathy problem.
Isn't it though? And I didn't even mean for that to happen.
I know. I'm like, did you plan this? It was so natural.
Can I just say yes?
Totally. We're great at planning. No, so I think obviously the double empathy problem for some people who don't know is a theory. Actually, why don't you explain it? I would love to hear you explain it.
Sure. So it's a theory, and it's a phrase that was coined, I think, not too long ago. Yeah. Damian Milton, 2012. So not even that long ago, right?
I know, barely over a decade. Yeah.
I know. I mean, the older I get, the longer that seems like not that long. Right? So
that's fair. I relate.
The double empathy problem is this idea that there's a misunderstanding in communication. And a lot of times when we think about misunderstandings of communication, between neurodivergent and neuronormative people, we think that that's all on the neurodivergent person, right? That they're not understanding the communication that's coming at them from the neuronormative perspective. But the double empathy problem says it's actually both sides, right? That neurodivergent people may be having difficulty understanding the neuronormative perspective, but also neuronormative people are having trouble understanding the communication styles and perspectives of somebody who is neurodivergent. And that seems like a simple concept. But when we live in a world that is so stuck on the idea of neuronormative communication, it's very easy to say this is one-sided, right? We as neurodivergent people need to learn to understand how other people communicate, or we need to understand how they're feeling, or we need to understand how they see things. But the double empathy problem says, actually,
Goes
we
both
all
ways.
need to learn it goes both ways, right? It goes both ways because it devalues the neurodivergent experience and communication styles, and even those wonderful things like empathy, right? That ability to feel with somebody or for somebody in ways that don't look the same as they would in a more neuronormative way. It devalues that experience as valid. And so the double empathy problem is like, okay, here's the thing, right? Like when it really comes down to it, here's the thing. If I have to learn how the standards are that I'm not meeting as a neurodivergent person, you, neuronormative person, really need to understand the perspective that I come at and realize that it has validity, right?
Yeah.
You may not understand it. And this is the really important thing to me is you don't have to understand it. You just have to believe it. And I
Yeah.
think that goes back to the whole proving everything, right?
Everything,
It's
right?
the everything. To
Yeah.
me, that's the bottom line. I don't
Acknowledge
need you
and
to understand
validate.
it.
Acknowledge and validate.
Exactly. Right. Right. Believe. Just believe.
Love it.
And be curious, right? Ask
Yes.
questions and know that just like you can't, you, whoever you is, like this vague you, right? Can't explain to me like these sort of social obligations that I may not understand. I may not be able to explain to you the logic that goes through my head, but it's there. It's there. The reason that I didn't pick up on, your distress about blah, 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 and I don't know what that is,
Yeah.
isn't because I didn't want to. It's because I truly didn't. Or the reason that I'm actually reading your mood and you didn't expect me to is because I just can do that. And it's not to call you out. It just happens. I didn't know that I was going to say it out loud. I just kind of thought everybody was able to read the room the way I read the room.
Totally.
And that's not true, right? So I don't know. I think it's really important for us to realize that there are always more perspectives than we're taking into account. And that's how we actually get to a place where we don't have to prove ourselves anymore,
Yes.
is when people are curious about difference. And I don't mean difference as in neurodivergent is different. I mean like differences between people, right?
Yes.
Differences amongst people. I think that's the important piece that I really want to stress is it's not like I'm different. It's we are different from each other.
Totally. And I think often the burden to educate falls on the neurodivergent community. And that can be so anxiety inducing to think that you need to not only educate the neuronormative perspective of, well, this is how we're different, but also then to not know, how receptive they might be in terms of outright believing you, like we talk about, or somehow being not really on board and then needing some further proof. And again, it's all about that justifying and that pressure to constantly prove. And, a lot of my community are in burnout, and we talk about masking and burnout and the cognitive load of showing up in the world and constantly needing to fit into this mold that is, the valuing of neuronormative communication because you're that outlier is so exhausting. And one of the things And one of the
That's
things
exactly
I see
the word I was thinking. Yeah.
exhausting.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. One of the things that I see in my community and feel, in talking to people like you and so much of my job these days, I'm so lucky that I get to work with so many different neurodivergent people. And the validation and the ease of communication is so amazing. And like you said, like you and Emily, we're all so different between each other as well. I know so many autistic ADHDers, and we all have extremely different needs in terms of, some of us are very heavily ADHD, cutting people off, talking really quickly, and others are like much more the autistic side of it, like really needing more time to process and, it's just different. But the ease of it is the fact that we know that there's that judgment is removed and that really deep, authentic acceptance exists. And not always, because obviously we know that there's neurodivergent people that have really high rates of internalized ableism, not to their own fault because of the world we live in, and maybe haven't had the privilege of unpacking that and being exposed to, their neurokin and such. But what I do see is when, we get in a room, virtual or not, with pure neurokin, it's just beautiful to see that mask naturally slowly lift as we get more and more positive validation of being ourselves. And last night I was on a call to my group coaching program alumni catching up, and one of them said to me, like, coming to these sessions is just so incredible because I don't have to constantly apologize for who I am.
Yep.
Yeah. At the start of my coaching with them, it was about like they kept apologizing for talking over people, apologizing. Like it was just constant apologies, or like you could see them holding themselves back and trying to be what was expected. And just as we're all together and giving each other space, it's like this beautiful garden growing that I just wish we all had access to. We deserve access to.
It's like there's more oxygen in the room all of a sudden, right? It's like you can breathe and you didn't know that you weren't breathing as well before, right?
Oh my God, that's
it's
so
this
well said.
moment.
Yeah.
It's just this moment where you're like, I didn't know I wasn't filling my lungs, and now I'm filling my lungs.
Yeah.
And it's extraordinary, and you're right. Like I live in a house full of neurodivergent people, and our traits annoy each other. We get in each other's way, but none of us
access
says,
needs. Yeah.
oh my goodness, it's a whole thing.
I feel
And yet not a single one of us dismisses it as untrue, right? Not a single one of us, will say this is more important than my need. It's just, and I think that's why, I don't know, you and I, we just clicked when we met.
Yeah.
And I think part of it, that's because there's enough oxygen to go around in this room.
Yeah.
And we can both breathe with ease.
Absolutely. And I think, as you said, you don't know until you experience that. And all of a sudden, when you step back into those spaces that are not neuroaffirming, the lack of oxygen is all encompassing, and you cannot switch that awareness and recognition off. And so I think you hit this point where you're like craving it, whether that's being around neurokin more or creating like neurodiverse environments with multiple neurotypes where everyone is on board to validate everyone's experience,
Yeah, I think so. And I think too, there's a part of this that just occurred to me as we were talking, which is the fact that oftentimes, or sometimes, right? That sometimes neurodivergent people will show up in spaces that don't affirm them, and they will be dysregulated or upset or come across in a way that feels, I don't know, sharp or brittle. And I think what I want other people to understand is that is due to years of feeling like you don't fit. And sometimes there comes a point where like your patience is so low, right? That ability to hold that cognitive load is just not always there. You're not always able to hold it together. So there are things that people are not seeing that are causing that dysregulation. And part of it is feeling like I don't belong. I don't belong here.
Yeah.
And whether it's valid or not, often you that sort of lashes outwards into the place where people may not even understand that you don't feel like you are not belonging. That's so
Totally.
many knots in that one sentence, right?
Yeah,
But
I'm following. Yeah.
but it comes out in a way that I think can be off-putting, and I'm speaking about myself too, like, to be
Totally.
really clear. Like, I
Yeah.
have those moments where I'm just like, "Ooh, I wouldn't wanna be around me right now." Like,
Oh,
I
hard
don't
relate.
I don't even wanna be like
Yeah.
I don't even wanna be around me. I can't imagine anybody else wants to
Yeah.
be around me.
But like I think and not to cut you off, but just a
Yeah.
quick sidebar.
No, please. Yeah.
I think that experience is so real, and it reinforces that shame narrative, because it's almost that meta experience of you're seeing yourself do it and you have no control over it, and maybe you don't even really understand it fully yet, but it's just so hard for you to even unpack, let alone explain to other people the inner workings of why this is happening.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that there are neuronormative experiences that you can relate it to, right? I think there are many, many people who have had that experience of like being in a fight with a partner or a spouse or a friend or a family member or something, and saying something and getting so upset and just like watching yourself roll down the hill and you're like, I can't, I know I shouldn't, but I just can't stop myself right now.
Yeah.
That's a very neuronormative experience. That's just like a
Totally.
universal experience.
Yeah.
And I think comparing it to that is probably the best way I can explain to somebody, like, we all know what that's like. For neurodivergent people, sometimes it's bigger, it's more, it happens more often. And it's because we're tired. We're just
Totally.
tired. And and I just, I would love for there to be more spaces where we don't have to feel tired, where
Mm.
we can feel invigorated, and where we don't have to explain ourselves.
Yeah.
And, I think part of the way we do that is by not explaining ourselves, by
Yeah.
just being ourselves and not apologizing for it.
Unapologetically. I love that. And I think, like, in going back to what you were saying about how it happens like more often and maybe potentially more severely. I know you didn't say that, but that's what I'm thinking in my head. I think, like, where was I going with this? I had an epiphany. It'll come back. That's it. What I was thinking was, and there's that difference in rupture and repair, right? When you hit your limbic system and you're in that state, and,
Yeah.
In a neuronormative interaction, I think it's easier to empathize with why that happened to the other person and to repair it. Whereas when you've got this, neurodivergent, non-neurodivergent interaction, to try and repair that takes so much more effort to get the other side to understand how it even happened and whether that was like normal or
Right.
whether they can empathize with your experience, because maybe more likely than not, it wouldn't have happened to them in that same experience because they have a very different nervous system and sensory system and all of these things.
That's such a good point. It's so interesting that you say that because I think a lot of the things that happen to me are based on sensory regulation.
Me too.
Or a lot of things that happen, my interactions are sort of based on my sensory, uh, I don't know, my sensory regulation, my ability to sort of, cope with what's happening around me. If you're somebody who processes information without it being problematic, right? In ways that, the information comes in, it gets processed correctly, the output is correct, all of those kinds of things. If it all matches up, you don't actually know what it's like to feel like you're out of control, even though you may look like you're in control, right?
Yes.
When I'm very, very stressed, I have synesthesia, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if people don't know what that means. It's like your senses get all mixed up. And there are times where like I smell colors or like I read and it makes me nauseated because I don't know, like tasting it. I don't even know how to describe
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
but it's a real experience that unless you actually have been there or have had the experience of like something feels off,
Yeah.
it's very hard to understand that that's a truth.
Mm,
And so those things that are truths for us, I mean, there's no way to even like describe some of those experiences.
yeah.
There just
And
isn't.
even when you do, like, I don't know about you, but when you're in the moment of having sensory overwhelm, the reality is so much worse than when you're just like thinking back to it, right?
Yeah.
Like in that moment where you are so overloaded, and you're in physical pain or discomfort, I always find it so much worse than when I think back to it. And it's almost like I almost gaslight myself. Like, it wasn't that bad, Annie, you know? I'm like, oh, actually, it really was. And that's why I was behaving like this, or that's why this happened, or whatever. But it's like we forget childbirth, right? We forget pain. It's in our nature. So I think, you know, to explain it to people who, one, don't even have the severity of that overwhelming sensory experience to begin with, because their sensory systems are more regulated, good on them. But two, also to be outside of that experience, it's so hard to get that true buy-in, right? Of like, this is real.
Yeah, it is. It is. And it's like, even explaining it doesn't, I don't know, like, I think you're exactly right. Like, even explaining it feels so distant from experiencing it, you know?
Yeah.
And when I'm completely sensory overwhelmed, I literally, I can't make decisions. I can't talk, somebody asks me a question and I'm just like, I don't know. I'm either crying or I'm staring at them, or I'm just like yelling. I mean, like, I don't even know. I don't, like, half the time I don't know what's come out of my mouth.
Yeah.
I really, really don't.
It's almost like this dissociation, like, just there's so many different ways we can react. And obviously it's always different depending on so many factors.
It's so at odds with who we are in other situations that I think people have a hard time believing we can be both of those things.
And they're both just as valid. That's such a good point. Such a good point. Yeah. And I think that's one of the hardest things about being high masking, is that because more often than not, you present in a neuronormative way, it's harder to believe that you have the struggles that they see in the neurodivergent population that don't have access to masking and can't hide a lot of those experiences. And obviously masking is something that sometimes we can do, sometimes we can't do, sometimes we try to choose not to do because we know it's harmful ramifications. But there is that real divide of like, well, which one's the real Annie? Is it the high masking seems to have it all together? I don't even think you have a real disability or condition. You're just like wanting a diagnosis, quote unquote, from what we were talking about earlier. Yeah. Sorry. Or you are very much, and I'm a very much proudly disabled neurodivergent person who can be both.
Right.
Right?
I'm gonna give you an example of the best experience I had with the double empathy solution. Right.
Oh, I like that.
So for a while, I was the vice president of learning and knowledge at the JED Foundation, which is an organization that does work around preventing suicide in youth and adolescents. And the chief medical officer and I worked very closely together. They're a wonderful psychiatrist who also works with the LGBTQIA community, and decided to work with me to learn more about neurodiversity, and did so by understanding my neurodivergence.
Yay.
And it was really cool. It was a very cool experience. We, at one point, this is such a weird story, but I'm going to tell it anyway.
No, I want to hear.
We as an organization had the opportunity to go and like do the opening of the stock market of the New York Stock Exchange, which, if you don't know, is in the middle of Times Square in New York City, which is more lights and more noise than anywhere else. And they do this thing where you ring the bell and then you all have to cheer and you're all crowded together. And I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And Laura Erickson-Schroth, who is this amazing person, was there with me and, was just kind of watching me and like joking with me. And we walked outside after we had done that. And of course, then we're all up on this giant billboard in the middle of Times Square. And I'm just so overwhelmed. And I'm looking at my own face on there. And I was like, whoa. And she said to me, I thought you were just going to lose just lose everything, like lose, and it was so lovely because what she said to me is like, you were just like, your eyes were popping, your body was twitching, and she was like, and I was just really wanted to make sure you're okay. And the human resources person was standing right next to us. And the human resources person had this like, oh, you can't say that to her kind of reaction, because of course she did. And Laura was like, no, we're cool. I'm just acknowledging that she was not okay in that moment. And it was just so beautiful to me to have this person say, you did it, you functioned, and also I could see how much you were struggling. And it was just such a moment where I was like, and you were in your element. You were dancing, you were having fun, you were sociable, you love all of this hubbub. And I could recognize that for them, that was like the perfect experience. For me, it was really difficult. And the two of us could realize that that existed in the same space. And I mean, just shout out to Laura for seeing me
so
for who I
validating.
am. It was amazing.
It's just
amazing.
like real recognition for who you are. And I think, you know, we do shy away from pointing out any sort of struggles or anything negative or anything just not obscenely positive. But it does invalidate our experience, you know? And it's not like I want to walk around and getting everyone to notice how much I'm struggling as much, but it is when they're a trusted colleague who's saying that in clearly a way that's like, I see you and I'm here for you, which is really what we want, right? It's not you need to unpack that for me and like what happened there. It's I'm here and I'm holding space for your experience right now.
And it was 100% that. It was
beautiful.
I never really thought about it before, but that's like the double empathy solution, right?
Yes.
And we talk about the double empathy problem. Oh no.
Yes.
Maybe.
I'll bring you back on in another 2 years and we'll talk about that.
Oh my gosh.
I mean it. I think this is, it needs to happen.
You know,
it really
I think it does. And I think if we're going to talk about problems, we also need to think about what the solutions are. And in that moment,
that was absolutely the solution. And I think, you know, as you said, we're still in the very early days of even understanding the double empathy problem. And so it's first is about awareness and recognition that it exists. And then the next phase is really like, what do we do about it?
Yeah.
Which is what we need. Right?
Well, and the answers don't lie just with us as neurodivergent people. And I think that's the really, really important thing.
So true.
I keep saying that's the really important thing. There are all these important things,
they're all very
things,
important
right?
things, Amanda.
They're all very important
They
things.
really are.
But I do think we need to not take all of the responsibility.
Yeah. We really need allies in this space.
Yeah.
It needs to be a collective solution.
I think empathy is something we should always be striving for, regardless of whatever the situation is. And to just add on that component of it, you know, I do a lot of talking about empathy. I wrote a children's book about empathy. Like I literally, like this is my happy place.
Yes, totally.
And the biggest part of empathy that I try and share with people is it's about perspective taking. It's not about agreeing. It's not about even understanding. It's just about recognizing different perspectives and believing them, believing them to be true.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I think that's a perfect segue into our behind closed doors section. So for the podcast listeners, now we're moving into the Hold No Bars section of our chat that's going to be on the NeuroAccess network. And this is purely for network members, which are all neurodivergent identifying adults. So if you're keen to join, you can go to neuroaccess.com/the network and join up. And depending on when you're listening to this, it might be in waitlist mode. We only open the doors every now and then to help my all neurodivergent staff with the demands of onboarding new people and such. We're a neurodiversity affirming workplace.
And Amanda take on the real world.
Yeah. Yes. Annie and Amanda define the real world. Redefine it. Thank you so much. I always love talking to you, and I know that my beautiful network members will get so much out of this as well. I always do. So thank you so much for giving up your evening for us.
Such a pleasure. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Princess and the Pea Podcast. I hope you found my conversation with Amanda interesting, thought-provoking, and empowering. If you'd like to hear more of Amanda's marvelous mind, her book, co-authored by Emily Kershaw-Morris, hosted the Neurodiversity Podcast, which I highly recommend, is available for pre-order now. We will link the link in the show notes. It is called Neurodiversity Affirming Schools, Transforming Practices so all students feel accepted and supported. Oh, my soul. And you should definitely get it. I've already pre-ordered. I'm so excited. Remember, your voice matters, and together we can create a world where neurodivergent individuals are truly included and have their access needs met. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate and leave a review on Apple Podcasts so we can reach more magnificent minds. And for more resources or to join our community, visit neuroaccess.com.au and follow us on Instagram at Princess and the Pea Podcast. I'm your host, Annie Crowe, and until next time, keep advocating for yourself and others, and day by day we'll make this world a better place for all. Sending many spoons your way.